If I could have you all come and take a seat, find a seat, steal a seat, be great. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for being here. I didn't know what to expect, and I'm actually happy that people came besides my family. So I'm excited that you guys are here too, don't worry. My name is Jeff. For those who don't know me, if you know me, it's also Jeff, but just in case. I'm on staff here at Grace Church, and I had the fun task of coordinating this event for tonight. And fortunately, for you, I'm not going to be speaking too much, but I wanted to preface the idea of conversations and why we do it at Grace Church. And then I would like to introduce the speakers and kind of explain the format of how tonight's going to work. And then we're going to go straight through. We have some amazing speakers for tonight. And you'll have the opportunity throughout tonight. There's going to be a number up on the screen. And if you want to text in questions for our panel to answer, you text the word marijuana to the number on the screen. And then once you do that, you can text in any questions you have. And what we will do is we'll take them and we will do our best to address as many of them as we can during the Q&A part. So, why do we do conversations? Because we don't know how. In our society, I'm a communication studies scholar. I don't like that word, but that's what they call me. I have a degree in communication studies. I also teach for Azusa Pacific University in communication studies. And the one thing I have learned is we do not know how to have a conversation. We know how to talk. We know how to voice our opinions, but we don't know how to listen. We don't know how to take it in. We have forgotten how to do that. And so that's why we want to have conversations. We want to say, hey, let's slow down. Let's be able to come together. Let's be able to listen to what everyone has to share. And we can disagree. That is okay. But then kind of just share our thoughts, share our opinions, and really come together. And what I love about Grace Church is we want to bring those conversations into the four walls that we call our home. We're not afraid of what might happen, because this is where it should start. And for the topic of marijuana, there are a lot of opinions on it. In fact, every one of you in here has an opinion. One side or the other, you have an opinion. It might not be a strong opinion. It might be one that's up in the air, but you have an opinion. So tonight's event is a very difficult event if we just come in here with our minds made up and we know what we're going to know. But if we change our posture and we're willing to listen, and I'm not trying to lecture you like I would do students or anything like that, but I'm trying to remind us that sometimes it's okay to okay, what do they have to say? It doesn't mean I have to agree with it. And then let me ask this question. Because if we kind of change our posture for tonight, and we're okay with listening, we're okay with kind of exploring something, and I'm not advocating one way or the other, I'm just saying let's listen to what our panelists have to say. I think it can really create a great dialogue. But here's the most important thing I want you to take away. Tonight is the beginning of a conversation. This isn't the conversation, this isn't where it starts and where it ends, this is just the beginning. The conversation happens as you guys leave and you go with your friends and your family, as you go back to your schools, as you go back to your places of work, you go back to your friendship circles. That's where the real conversation happens. And if you're a parent or you're around teenagers, there are some conversation guides in the back, which is, honestly, they're conversation starters. They're questions you can ask. Anybody can take them. They're very simple. And it's on the welcome table in the back, and if you'd like to grab one during our intermission, you can do that. So, sound good? All right, so let me explain how tonight's going to work. I'm going to talk a whole lot less after this, I promise. Okay, I have 4 amazing speakers that are going to come and present to you. The way it's going to work is they will all come up. They'll come one after the other. We're going to go straight through. I don't want to waste any time with fluff or introductions after I get off here. And then they are going to present their expertise. They're from all different areas. Our first speaker, she is a marriage and family therapist intern for Turning Point Counselor. And I've asked her to come and present on the history of marijuana and how it has kind of influenced our culture. After her, we have a gentleman, Alan. He is a law enforcement personnel. He's from a local agency. He serves as a captain. for that agency, and he's going to come and he's going to talk about the law. He's going to present the facts, and we know, a lot of us know the laws are changing, but we don't necessarily know what that means. And I know they're changing, you know they're changing, but if we talk about it, it's all different views. So he's going to come and offer clarity there. After Alan, we have Dr. Dan coming up. Dan is a medical doctor, but he's a psychiatrist, and he's an adjunct at USC, so he's pretty dang awesome. But he's the medical director for Los Encinas Hospital in Pasadena. After Dan speaks, we will have Chris Jackson, who is our senior pastor, come and present just what does the Bible say about this. And after Chris speaks, we will take a short intermission, allow you guys to stretch, allow you guys to talk, and then we will take the questions that you have in, we'll come back, we'll do Q&A, and then I think that's what most of us that's what I'm really excited for. So, if that sounds good to you, I would like to, real quick, I was given this. You guys see this in the grocery store? It's Time magazine. Marijuana goes to Main Street. Just thought I'd let you know we're keeping up with the times. But seriously, we are. Thank you for being here. I'm excited. I don't have any idea what's going to happen, so it's going to be fun. We're all in this together. So at this time, would we please join me in welcoming up Kat?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. I know Jeff had a lot of work go into putting this together, so if you have a teen in the room, they're in excellent hands. Again, I just want to introduce myself. I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I work for a nonprofit Christian agency called Turning Point Counseling. So we partner with local churches, and so I actually work in the church office with the staff of Grace Church of Laverne here. And so they've asked me to come speak tonight about the history of marijuana, which I know is the part you all are looking forward to the most. So you're welcome. With constant changes in laws and just in the culture and in how predominant this substance has become, we felt it was an important thing to bring up. And so a lot of us don't know how it came to be this way or where it even came from, how long it's been around, because it's relatively new to us in the United States. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about how it got to where it is today. First of all, marijuana has made a really long migration. It began, it was first discovered in Asia thousands of years ago. And they believe as far as 4000 BC was the first time it was actually discovered. The first written record is in 2000 BC. And so this has been around a long time, and yet it didn't reach the southern United States until the 20th century. So it has had a long migration. After it was found in Asia, coastal farmers brought it to Korea, and then it came to South Asia and was widely used in India. In fact, India was one of the places where it really took off. It was being used in religious ceremonies as well as cultural engagements and things like that. It really became very widespread in India. It moved from Asia to Europe and the Middle East, and then Scythians carried it from the Middle East to Southeast Russia and the Ukraine. It's believed that Germanic tribes brought the drug to Germany, and from there it went to Britain. And then over the next centuries, finally migrated into Africa, reaching South America in the 19th century. And like I said, it didn't reach North America until the 20th century. And it actually wasn't until the Mexican Revolution of 1910-1911 when it finally made its way to the Southwest United States, with Mexican immigrants fleeing the country during the Mexican Revolution. So it's, as long as it's had this really extensive history, it's fairly new to us in the United States. We're constantly still learning what this substance can do. For those that don't know, marijuana, the word marijuana actually refers to the dried leaves, flowers, stems, and seeds from the hemp plant known as cannabis sativa. This plant contains a mind-altering chemical, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. I'm going to leave the rest of those terms to Dr. Suzuki for later. So we'll just call it THC for now. And that's the thing that I think a lot of us have heard about marijuana, is that it contains this substance, THC. Marijuana, before becoming legalized, was the most commonly used illicit drug in the United States. In 2015, more than 11 million young adults ages 18 to 25 had reported using marijuana in the past year. There's two subspecies of the plant. The first is cannabis sativa, which is known as marijuana, and this has psychoactive properties. There's a second kind of underlying subspecies to that, which is cannabis indica, and a third, cannabis ruderalis, but that one's really uncommon. And then another subspecies is cannabis sativa L. The L stands for the botanist that discovered this, which was Carl Linnaeus, and that one is hemp. It's actually a non-psychoactive form of cannabis, which is used in manufacturing products such as oil, cloth, and fuel. Cannabis is used for many purposes. It's used in seeds for animal feed, fiber for hemp rope, oil, which is actually used as a vehicle for paint, which is kind of disgusting if you think about it. Ancient China, they used it for medicinal purposes, such as an anesthetic during surgery and even during childbirth. And in India, like I said, it was kind of a merge between the religious and cultural life there. And so they considered it part of the 5 kingdoms of herbs, which release from anxiety. In Chile, it was used for fiber, and in North America, it was predominantly used for rope, clothing, and paper. Now, there's many different forms that marijuana comes in, and we're gonna put a picture of some of those forms on the screen so you can see them. In the top left is the first one I'm gonna talk about. It has they're putting it next to a penny for size relation there, but that's what we know as hash, or hashish. It's the most concentrated and potent form with high levels of that THC. It's derived from the dried resin of the flowering tops of the plant and then compressed into either balls, cakes, or sticks. You're kind of seeing pieces of cakes up there. The main sources to obtain hash are from the Middle East, North Africa, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Hash oil, which is the one right in the center there, is a refined oily extract from the plant. The THC level in hash oil is approximately 15%. That's pretty high. It's typically mixed with tobacco or marijuana and then smoked. Hemp, which is the fibrous item, which is in the top right and then also bottom left, is one of the first fiber plants cultivated. It's largely used in religious settings and also used as a natural medicine. It became popular in America for rope, clothing, and paper. And then hemp fibers were used in clothing and jewelry. And then there's also marketable cannabis items. So if you've gone to the grocery store and you've seen something that says hemp, or even the brand is something hemp, that's because there's a lot of products that use the non-psychoactive properties of hemp in their products. And those can be in cereal, candy, coffees, teas, body lotions, makeup, even shampoos. Now, there's many varieties of marijuana, and the potency varies greatly. Marijuana is much more powerful than it was 30 years ago. In the 1970s, when people really started using marijuana, the average THC level was less than 1%. Well, in 2002, they found that it had risen to more than 6%. And then in 2008, it was at 8.5% THC level on average. So it's gotten a lot stronger than it was back in the 70s when it was being used a lot. Differences in potency are what make various strains of the substance popular. And for instance, some of the most potent are the most popular because people will get their high a lot more quickly. Current strains known for their potency include Purple Haze, Early Girl, Big Bud, and Hindu Kush. So those are some more like street names that you may hear, and those are the ones that have the highest levels of potency. Another thing to consider is that they do come in many different forms, and edibles, which is the same as being kind of cooked into something or baked, those are going to be really the highest in potency as well, purely because the effect takes a little longer on your body, so you're going to consume a lot more thinking that you haven't taken enough to get the result you want, and therefore it can be very dangerous. So that's just something to keep in mind in terms of the different forms that it comes in. So now that we kind of have a vocabulary understanding, and we've summed up a 6,000-year history in less than 10 minutes, I know I've got you guys super alert and ready to learn about the laws. So even though I know this has been the most exciting part for you, I beg you to stay and listen to what the next speakers have to say about the laws, the effects, and what the Bible has to say. So please help me welcome Alan to the stage to speak about the legal perspective.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me here this afternoon. I really appreciate it. I was really taken back when a good friend of the family's, Jeff, asked me to speak of it from a legal standpoint, from the law enforcement standpoint, and what we're dealing with out on the street. So I do appreciate this time that you're listening to me, and I really appreciate it. I just want to put out there, I am not judging. If anybody uses it, that's a personal decision. I understand that. My position up here today is to merely bring forth fact, bring forth, like Jeff said, conversation in what the facts are that we're dealing with in law enforcement today as far as marijuana. As you know, or hopefully if you don't, well, I'm going to let you know, marijuana is now legal in the state. Marijuana recreational use is now legal in the state of California. This was voted in by the majority of Californians on November 8th of 2016. And because of that, laws have changed. And we are dealing with a whole different set of circumstances in law enforcement. We here in California law enforcement are looking to states such as Colorado, states of Washington, where their legalizations happened back in 2014, I believe. Yes, 2014. And we're looking at some of the lessons that they're learning, some of the facts that they are dealing with that cannot be disputed through different research data that's been given by those states, as well as our conversations in California with their law enforcement agencies. So the legalization of recreational use marijuana was voted, like I said, in 2016 on November the 8th under Proposition 64. Now, this legalized the personal use and cultivation of marijuana. And also there's regulations for non-medical marijuana businesses. So businesses that want to go ahead and start, a pot shop, or however you want to call it, selling everything from, marijuana, THC and laced edibles, things of that nature for a recreational use. The state's going to be looking at licensing, and people can apply for licenses in January of 2018, within the year. Now, federally, marijuana recreational use is still illegal. Under the Controlled Substances Act, Congress made it clear that marijuana is listed as a Schedule I drug. And the doctor can actually go into this more. Schedule I, basically all your drugs that serve no real medical use in that nature. Now, granted, I'm just telling you what the law says. If there's somebody out there using medicinal marijuana, like I said, I'm not here to judge. I'm just letting you know what the facts are and what the laws are dealing with. Now, however, Congress has deemed that states remain free to pass laws relating to marijuana, just like it is now, what we're dealing with. Marijuana is illegal on the federal level. State level, pretty obvious, it's now legal. Because of the way our government works, all across the land, the states have certain rights and they have the abilities to say what is legal and what is not. Now, because marijuana is illegal at the federal level, what we're starting to see and what we're already seeing in states like Washington and Colorado, the banking systems, FDIC, they're insured federally. But because of that, a lot of the banking systems and credit unions will not provide services to the marijuana industry, which makes the marijuana industry in a lot of those states, and what we're starting to see now here in California, an all-cash type of business. And what happens in an all-cash type of business? From the law enforcement side, from working the streets, I've been in law enforcement for about 22 years now. What we're seeing, if there's a heavy load of cash sitting in a building, and if it's kept in there, or if it's not properly watched, we're going to see an increase in robberies, street robberies, residential or commercial burglaries, and things of that nature. Me personally, I'm already starting to see it. I've seen well, I can't go into active investigations, but I have seen investigations where, because of marijuana sales, somebody couldn't put monies into a bank. They had a whole ton of cash on them, and it created a major incident that myself and my officers had to deal with. Proposition 64 also sets up a regulatory system for the marijuana business. So, for example, what we're going to be seeing in the very near future is like cultivation. That's going to be overwatched and managed by Food and Agriculture. Manufacturing, Department of Health. the testing of marijuana and you know, the different strains and the quality is by, again, Department of Health. And then there's retailers, which is the Department of Consumer Affairs. So this is a business that is going to grow, whether you want it to, whether you don't, whatever your opinion, it's going to grow. It's going to grow big. The infrastructure behind it is going to grow exponentially. Now, however, cities, different municipalities, cities like Laverne, cities like wherever, you know, Pasadena, Los Angeles, San Diego, cities maintain the right to enact local laws governing marijuana businesses. Now, it's all up to each municipality's communities to work with their elected officials, their city councilmen, their mayors, and so forth, on what kind of regulations does the community want in regards to marijuana. A city can, if everybody votes for it, can say, we don't want recreational marijuana businesses in our city. We just don't want it. If that vote goes that way, then so be it. Legally, the municipalities have that right to go that route. Or if they all voted in and say, go for it, you can have as many marijuana, recreational marijuana facilities in your city. For example, the city of Denver, it's been reported through the city of Denver Police Department, there are more marijuana pot shops for recreational use than there are Starbucks. As we know, there's a Starbucks on every corner. I know because I'm typically visiting a Starbucks every day to get my caffeine fix. So, but those are some of the issues there. Now, here's a big one. Proposition 64, the legalization of adult use of recreational marijuana. So what does that mean? I think this is what a lot of people want to know. You can have up to 28.5 grams of dry marijuana. You can have up to 8 grams of concentrate oils. You can cultivate up to 6 plants at your residence if you so desire. Now, the exceptions with the use of recreational marijuana here in California. As an adult, you cannot smoke it in public. You have to smoke it at home in a private residence or your buddy's house or whatever. Cannot smoke it in public. You cannot smoke or use marijuana where smoking is prohibited. So if you walk into a business, you walk in anywhere and it says no smoking, it's a no smoking facility, that also means no smoking marijuana. You cannot smoke while driving an automobile, a boat, or aircraft. Nor can you be a passenger in that vehicle utilizing it. You cannot have an open container in your vehicle while using marijuana, and you cannot use marijuana within 1,000 feet of a school. So these are the rules that here in California that are being set that is going to take place. Now also, with this use of marijuana, and I understand, I've heard both sides of the argument. I have my own personal beliefs is in the matter, and obviously I won't go into that, but I'm in law enforcement, so you can pretty much get a good idea of which way I go on that idea. But marijuana, we've seen the arguments, we've seen the way it was presented up in Sacramento by the people who were wanted for the legalization. Everybody always brings up taxes. We can tax it, we can bring in a lot of money. Yeah, that's true. I mean, just for example, I mean, we're talking a 15% excise tax, a state tax of 7.25, a city, a municipality that has marijuana, that agrees to have marijuana recreational facilities selling it in their jurisdiction, they can have additional taxes put on it, at the local level. So yeah, there's money to be made. One of the big questions is how is that going to affect us here in our state of California? That's a big one. I just attended a death by PowerPoint lecture on the legalization of marijuana in Anaheim probably about a month ago, along with my chief of police and other members of our command staff. And outside of pinching my inner thighs trying to stay awake, as they were killing me on this, there were certain issues that did come up that we were seeing, okay, and this is still to be worked out. How much money is going to go to research? How much money is going to go to enforcement of these, of the laws that are governing the use? Now, they give us percentages and things like that, but I'll tell you what, being in government as long as I have, it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out in the near future. So, now, Public safety concerns. And again, I've heard both sides of the story. I've seen people who are like, hey man, I smoke a little bit. It's cool, I'm good. And then I hear other people, I've seen people every day I go to work who are just, using weed on a regular basis, and it's pretty evident. For example, so what are we gonna see in California? Well, we're going to find out eventually. We are all gonna find out as citizens of this state. But what we have nice to do is we look at like Colorado and Washington, and we can see what they've dealt with already and what they are dealing with. For example, like in Colorado, emergency visits of all ages have gone up. Homelessness issues are being attached to the legalization of marijuana usage in those states. I'm not going to go into more facts behind it, backing those up, but this is all open source material that anybody can research. Youth use was up by kids, minors, anybody under 18. For example, indoor grows. They have very similar laws to ours. The electricity for an indoor grow is equivalent to like 19 refrigerators being used all at the same time. If you want to pay that bill, go right ahead. In Denver, like I said, there was more marijuana stores in Starbucks. In Washington, looking between 2013 and 2014, 98% of student drug violations in Seattle public schools were marijuana related. In 2014 also, the youth under 20, 45% of the calls to poison control centers. Marijuana impaired driving increased 122% from 2010 to 2014. In 2014, marijuana-related traffic fatalities jumped 20%. So there are going to be those issues that we all need to consider as citizens, as parents, as just regular old community members. We were going to see those different issues. I myself, in the jurisdiction where I've worked, I'm already starting to see, just within probably the last 2 months, my guys are coming up to me and saying, hey, just be aware, we've got this call at the high school. We're transporting 4 kids right now. And I'm like, oh, what happened? Oh, well, so-and-so went to his older brother. His older brother gave him Pop-Tarts. Look like Pop-Tarts, but it ain't the regular Pop-Tart. Gummy bears, THC-laced gummy bears. In the edibles, and of course, the good doctor can go more into this if we need be, the THC content is so much higher. So these kids, one kid ate 1 Pop-Tart and it laid him out flat. I mean, he was high as a kite and he had to get transported over to the school. During our investigation, we looked into it, we found out he's getting it from his older brother, who was an adult. Yeah, well, we ended up arresting the older brother. So, because we have to do our jobs, and due diligence and do what we're paid to do. So there are those issues that we are starting to see more with the kids. Hash oil explosions. The extraction of oil from marijuana, also known as hash oil, we're starting to see that more now these days as far as explosions. It's a very dangerous process in the way it does. So like, we've all heard of the meth lab explosions, right? Throughout my career, I've seen enough of those too. In our jurisdiction, we're starting to see more and more hash oil explosions. I personally got called out one night and rolled over to one to where this house blew up. My initial officers on scene got there in enough time because these 2 guys were sitting there extracting oil, not being careful or whatever they want to do. They looked it up on YouTube, how to extract hash oil. So these 2 guys said, dude, that'll be cool, let's go do it. So they're doing it in this duplex house that's split in half. On the other side of their wall is a family of 4, including an infant. So these 2 guys want to go ahead and extract hash oil, and they blew up. They blew up, fire starts. My guys get there, and girls, we get there initially, and one guy comes right out of the house looking like the Walking Dead. Stuff melting all over him and everything like that. We managed to get the family out of the house, thank God. But I'm just telling you, that's just a fact. I've seen another explosion. These guys who blew up their house, luckily it was their house. Nobody else was in that, but they blew themselves up. Did they make it? Yeah, they made it, but they're completely maimed, I'll tell you that much. So again, that's just a fact. I'm not here to judge, I'm just letting you know what we are seeing out on the streets right now in law enforcement. You look at, let me back up a little bit, you look at marijuana and you hear the arguments. Okay, some people said, hey man, I just smoke a little weed, no problem. I smoked some in high school, no problem. Well, guess what? What you're using in high school is not what you're seeing today out there. As said just before me, the THC levels are extremely high. The manufacturing or growing of marijuana, people say with this new legislation, we'll be able to do it in a much controlled environment. Maybe that's the case, maybe not. I know for a fact, I've seen some of these grows myself, where during operations, when I was a lot younger and I had a more fun job than sitting behind a desk, we choppered in with the DEA on Black Hawk helicopters. We jumped off about 1,000 meters away from a marijuana grow, and we patrolled in. We dodged booby traps. I dodged fish hooks at eye level that the marijuana growers were using. Eye level, which I was okay, went over my head. My partner behind me had to watch out. So, and I got there, we took down at least 2,000 plants in this particular operation. But what are some of the things I'm seeing at this operation? I see AK-47 rifles. I see more automatic weapons. I saw a block of C4 explosive, military grade. No reason why that should be there. I saw marijuana plants that were being fertilized with the leftover feces of the growers who were dumped out in the forest to tend to their gardens for, the particular group that hired them to do that. So, now will that change with legislation? Some say it will, some say it won't. From what we're seeing in Colorado, and the Colorado authorities, they're saying that, hey, there is still a very highly active black market for marijuana, even though it is legal, because people will always try and make a buck. They will move marijuana to states where it is not legal. We've seen reports, I've read a study, and again, this is open source. If anybody has any questions, please see me after this. I'd be more than happy to show you the studies, the sources that I've read. A study that because cartels made so much money on marijuana, transporting it in and out, with the current legislation and the more legalization as it goes through different states, they need to make up their money. So what are they seeing? They're seeing an increase in transportation and in trafficking of your cocaine, your heroin, things of that nature, even more potent Schedule I illegal drugs on that issue. So again, it's just something, you take it for what it is. You can not listen to anything I'm saying. I just really want to put out the facts. One of the biggest things that we're seeing, that I've seen, I know in my career for marijuana, it's always a good start. It's a start. It's a gateway. That's my opinion. That's what I've seen, and I've read the studies too. I'm sure a lot of you have, or if you don't, please feel free to. Some will say no. Some will say yes. For what I've seen, absolutely. I see it every day. I see it transfer. I see guys that we deal with on such a regular basis, whether they're homeless or whether they're burglars or anything. Somebody's always got weed on them, and the ones that we're seeing, they're moving on to higher type of, more potent drugs, more dangerous, whatever you want to call it, drugs with very addictive properties that will ruin their lives as well as their families. Now, what we used to see in the past is that, in the past, when I say past, it wasn't that long ago, prior to California changing its regulations again, changing the definition of what crime is as far as dangerous drugs. California spoke. 60% of California spoke when they voted in Proposition 47, which basically decriminalized drugs. See, in the old days, when I was a young street cop, we could pop a guy, arrest him, sorry, I'm talking street lingo here. We'll sit there and we'll arrest a person for heroin. We take them to court. We take them to jail. We book them. We fingerprint them. They go to court within 72 hours for arraignment. They go see the judge. A lot of times, the judge will say, all right, you want to go to trial and fight this? Or I will hold this felony over your head, this possibility of state prison. I'll just hold it over your head, but I won't enact it unless you go to drug diversion. You go to NA. You go to your classes. And if you complete that, then we'll just put that off to the side. Now, you could literally stand in front of a police station and sit there, and if you want to snort cocaine off the hood of your car right off my police station, we'll go out there, we'll arrest you, we'll book you, we'll take your drugs, we'll put it into evidence, and we will write you a ticket and kick you out the door in about 2 hours. And hopefully you'll show up to court, where you'll get probation. That's it. So, but not to ramble on, backing up, I've seen where that could lead from, start smoking out, using your weed, whatever. Okay, I get it. Some people, that's what they want to do. I personally went into a marijuana medicinal store that opened up for an extremely short amount of time in our city where I worked, till we found out what it was. And of course, the city has the ability to shut, to not have them at the time. This was probably about 15 years ago. And there's the dude who owned it, who's like bloodshot eyes and everything. I'm like, hey man, look, who's been smoking weed in here? You're not supposed to be using the weed in this particular office. Oh, it's for medicinal purposes. I'm like, well, what's up? And he goes, I got chronic knee pain from when I played football 10 years ago. Oh, okay, no problem. I got chronic knee pain in my back, I got it in my knees, whatever. But I don't want to digress too much and put my own opinion in there, but I'm just stating fact. This is what I've seen, this is what I've dealt with, this is what we're going to see in California. So, come the next several years, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with our state. How's this going to affect our families? How's it going to affect our kids? How's it going to affect our businesses? The financial stability of the state? It's hard to say. I'll tell you what though, from law enforcement, a lot of the things we're seeing now, I'm even seeing it now because I'll read the statistics when we do the stats on what we're seeing in my jurisdiction. DUIs, always weed on board. When I say weed on board, they got weed in their system, always. So they get arrested for DUI. We call it DUI drugs, but take their blood and they face DUI charges. So that's just what we're seeing. And again, I'm not up here to judge. I have my own personal opinions. I think you can figure out what that is. But again, thank you very much for your time. That's just a quick run through on what we're seeing now and what we're going to see in the future. And I'd like to introduce Dan.
So hello, I'm Dan, and I see a lot of friendly faces I know, so appreciate being back here again. Now I'm a psychiatrist. I've been doing psychiatry for the last 28 years, so I've been working in the field of mental health and substance abuse for a long time. And it's great that everybody's here out tonight, and it's great that we're having conversations on marijuana, because we don't often have the opportunity to do that, right? And it's good. I would bet you, though, if I took a poll and asked people to raise their hands, because I know the statistics, I bet there's people here who smoked 20, 30 years ago, right? I bet there's some people who are smoking on weekends now. And if statistics are correct, there's people here who are smoking on a regular basis, right? So again, the purpose is not to judge. As a doctor for the last 30 years, what I've learned that it's not about telling people what to do, but it's about educating them, right? So this is all about education. And as we said at the beginning, it's all about when you leave here, being able to have conversations and talk about what we're hearing tonight. And my task in the next few minutes is to talk about the medical aspects of marijuana that we know, as well as some of the things that we don't know. And like most things, things are not good or bad, black or white, and marijuana is in that same grouping. Right? There are medicinal purposes for marijuana for which the Food and Drug Administration has approved. So in the form of marinol, which is THC, the most active ingredient in marijuana, it's approved for people with HIV who are cachectic, they're malnourished, they need to stimulate their appetite. There's also people who take it for approval for people taking chemotherapy who have cancer. And the chemotherapy, they're nauseated, they're throwing up, traditional medications aren't working for them. It's also proved that the American Neurological Association really feels like THC is going to be helpful for people with multiple sclerosis, who have central nervous system pain and muscle spasticity. So there are clearly medicinal purposes for marijuana. What really sort of teased me off, though, is I see people coming to my office and coming to the hospital on a regular basis with marijuana cards. And like the officer was saying, they'll say things like for knee pain or stomach ache or for depression or for anxiety. And there's really no good evidence for all these different things that's being passed out for. So again, it's very important that we understand why and when and what your decisions are in terms of if you decide to use things like marijuana. So the good things about marijuana, I mentioned some of the medicinal things. The point that I think is the most fundamental, important point I'd like to make tonight and go over, though, it's all about the context when you're taking marijuana. And it's very important to understand that being a psychiatrist, I'm impartial to the parts of the body that I think are important. So we have our turf battles. The cardiologists have their hearts, pulmonary people have their lungs, the nephrologists have their kidneys. I think the most amazing thing that's been given to us, just amazing creative thing, is the cauliflower. Oh, actually, I didn't mean the cauliflower. But I was in Big Bear with my wife this week, and I didn't have time to get back to my office to get my model of my brain before I came here. But this cauliflower really will serve a purpose for a number of illustrations. So imagine this is the brain. It's very interesting. I was talking to a mother earlier this week, and she was saying, the most important time that I should stay home with my child and help with the child development is really between the ages of 0 to 5. And that may be true from a lot of psychological standpoints, but from brain development, the most important critical time is really during the period from about 13 junior high until about 16 or 7 high school. There's a very interesting process called pruning of the brain, which I'll go over. But from the time you're in your mom's womb until we're about 21, 22, 23, our brain is actively developing. It's becoming more mature, it's becoming more efficient in a lot of different ways. And you see from the baby's skull is not completely formed, because as the brain grows, the skull has to expand so the brain fits in it. So that's one thing that's evident. But the thing you may not know is from about 13 until about 16, 17, the brain goes through a pruning process. Some of you out there may be gardeners, and whatever I touch dies if I put it in my office. But some of you, I'm sure, are really good gardeners. And what do? You prune plants, right? So use your imagination. This is the brain. Now think of this as a rose bush, right? So this is a rose bush. You guys cut off dead branches. You cut off even live branches. For what purpose? For the flowers that you want to become more nourished and become more beautiful, to look like a wonderful rose bush. The brain goes through the exact same process between around 13 to about 17 years old. And what that is when you're born as a baby, you actually have the same number of neurons, nerve cells, that you do later on in life. Right? It's multi-billions of brain cells. So those of you, though, who are like in junior high or high school, your brains are becoming more and more efficient every single day. Now, people my age, my brain's dying every single day. Right? Hopefully I have enough redundancy in my brain cells that by the time we have Q&A, I can still answer some questions. But my brain's literally dying every single day. But for those of you in junior high, high school, early 20s, your brain is getting better and better and better and greater and greater. Right? So what happens literally in the pruning process of the brain is your brain has billions of neurons, these brain cells, and they're all connected to each other. You have an axon, a nerve body, then you have these long axons. And the end of the axons, it's like literally the roots of a tree. It branches out all over the place. And all these branches of each nerve connects with other nerves. So I'm sure most of you saw Avatar, the movie, and how the whole planet, all the living organisms are connected to each other. That's literally the way the brain is. There's all these neuronal connections, and they communicate to one another through chemicals, neurotransmitters, the purpose of which is to conduct electrical impulses. They all speak to one another in different parts of the brain. And as your brain develops, there's a pruning process by which a lot of these nerve connections actually die. They're stripped away, they're disconnected, because as a baby growing up, there's too much of these connections, and you want your brain to be more efficient. Right? So that brain actually prunes itself, so some of these nerve endings die off and go away, others are formed. And what you see in the brain, if all of you know the model of the brain, there's different sulci, gyri. It's very bumpy. And also different parts of the brain get bigger, some get smaller. There's gray matter and white matter. And what we know from research purposes is that for people who are smoking marijuana when they're younger, if you do it more frequently and at a higher potency, that increases the likelihood that this pruning process does not occur correctly. Right? Now, it doesn't happen to everybody, but it's a risk factor. The younger, during that 13 to 16, 17 age group, higher potency, and we talked about these potencies of hash oil, of smoked marijuana, now 10 times greater than what we had in the 1980s, and the frequency has tremendous impact. And you can actually see structural changes in the brain of some of these people. So if you do brain scans, you look at animal models, the amount of gyri, the sulci, the bumpiness of the brain can be different. The cortical thickness can be different, as well as different parts of the brain. The hypothalamus may begin to shrink down. So you see physical changes in the brain. The younger you smoke, the higher frequency and the increased potency. The other thing is, there was a study done recently, I was reading it the other week, where these are people who are 13 to 21 smoking marijuana, then they're abstinent between 21 and 27, and then they neuropsych test them for things of cognitive functioning, things like IQ, ability to learn things, memory, and what we call executive functioning, and I'll explain. And even though these people had not been doing any marijuana for the last several years, there's still change in their capacity to do these cognitive functions. Executive functioning, that's in the frontal cortex of your brain here, has to do with your ability to problem solve. So for example, you get a college application, what do I do in terms of getting letters of recommendations? What do I write in terms of my personal statement? How do I make grades? How do I package it? How do I send it off to the school? Those are going from A to Z. And what happens if your prefrontal cortex is affected, if executive functioning problem, it becomes much more difficult to do that, right? Now, we all can think of examples of people who reportedly and have told us that they've smoked pot. Steve Jobs, Elon Musk. So there's a lot of brilliant people who smoke pot and nothing bad happened to them. Again, we're dealing with statistics. And what we see clearly is higher numbers of people have these difficulties than other people. Some people have more redundancy of the brain than others. If you do PET scan of the brain where you can look at, for example, I give somebody a task, and then we scan your brain and watch the electrical activity in your brain, you may be able to complete the task if, say, you've smoked pot in the past, but the amount of brain functioning that it takes, more areas light up that do the same process. So you may not even be aware of it, but it's taking more brain power in order to do that. So this concept of pruning during that age period is very important. The time of point where using marijuana, cannabis, makes a huge difference. Again, 13 to 17 is really that critical point. The other areas that we're looking at from a research standpoint in terms of marijuana during that stage frame has to do with emotions. I deal a lot with people with depression, anxiety, people with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. And the things that we're seeing in the research is the earlier, younger you start doing marijuana, there is evidence of increase in depression. There's increase of suicidality, suicidal thoughts. And when I see these people later on and I'm treating these various illnesses, they tend to have more treatment refractory problems. So for example, if you have a bipolar disorder and you've done a lot of marijuana when you're younger, it may become more difficult for the medications we currently have to be effective, become more treatment refractory. The other area that we've known for a long time is psychosis. So people with schizophrenia, the earlier you use marijuana, the more likely you are to then develop psychosis and schizophrenia later on. There's always there's a lot of genetic factors. There may be genetic connections between, say, schizophrenia and pot use. There's a tremendous psychosocial factors related to if you're using pot, what happens to you that might predispose you to stress. But if you take out all those variables, we still think there's a higher percentage of people using pot when they're younger that have psychotic disorders later on. It may not be a real high amount, but there's clearly a greater percentage. So again, not everybody who uses cannabis is obviously going to go psychotic, but I see in my hospitals people using cannabis in the short term, too much, they can become psychotic, and also those who have psychotic illnesses clearly have an exacerbation of their illness when using psychosis. Now, as the officer was saying, one thing that's difficult and dangerous is these different various forms of cannabis, and he was mentioning, which is important, I think, to point out that the edibles. So when you think about it, when people are smoking cannabis or they're vaping cannabis, it goes in the blood system very quickly, goes to your brain very quickly. It's very what we call lipophilic. It crosses the blood-brain very quickly, so you get that euphoric, whatever effect you have. So if you're smoking or if you're vaping, you can pretty much quickly titrate the effect that you want by how much you're ingesting. But for people doing edibles, the problem is there's a lag period by the time how much you ingest and some of the psychoactive effects. And so it's not uncommon when you're doing edibles, higher potency, you'll know how much you're getting in, you get more in your system, and those high levels of THC can cause psychosis and cause more difficulties. The other questions I often get asked about is addiction. Do I get addicted to marijuana? And this critical question about whether it's a gateway drug. So ways to think about addiction. There's different ways to think about it. One is physical dependency, right? So people who use alcohol, if you're drinking alcohol on a regular basis, after a while you become tolerant to it. You need more alcohol to get the same effect. So some people do see tolerance with the marijuana. But the other thing is physical dependency is if you stop alcohol, people have tremors, blood pressure goes up, they can't sleep, you can have withdrawal seizures, and ultimately you can have DTs and die from that. Cannabis certainly does not have that physical dependency to the level that alcohol does, but you clearly see people who are physically dependent on it. And what you see people who are smoking regularly is that they may have increased anxiety when they stop, increased agitation, and a lot of what you see is problems with sleep. They can't sleep. It takes a long time for their sleep patterns to regulate. So they may say, well, gee, doc, I really needed the cannabis because it really helped me sleep, helped my anxiety. But again, it's because of physiological withdrawals they're going through. And once they get through that period, sleep, anxiety can regulate, and often we'll medicate them during that period. So that's pure physical dependency. The thinking is about 1 in 10% of people who use marijuana will become physically dependent on it. If you look at the junior high and high school numbers, you're looking at about 1 in 6 adolescents will get physically dependent on it. But I think a bigger area is psychological addiction. So psychological addiction, I like to explain to people, is if you're drinking alcohol or smoking pot, or you're shopping too much, or if you're playing golf too much, you become psychologically addicted if your desire for that thing affects your relationships, it affects your work, it affects school, it affects legal issues, if you're afraid of the police, if it affects your your sense of integrity. If you're thinking about the drug, getting the drug, how do I get it, where I'm going to keep it, where I'm going to hide it, if that the preponderance of thinking about that all week is greater than everything else you're doing, then really that substance, be it marijuana, golfing, whatever, has a greater grip over you than you have over it. Right? So then you become psychologically addicted to it. The other issue is in terms of this, is it a gateway drug? The officer was talking about that. So gateway drugs is, does using marijuana increase your likelihood of going on to other hard drugs? And we actually have some data on that in the last few years. And what we find is that 20, 30 years ago, the sequence of events, say in junior high and high school, is something like this. People smoke cigarettes, they use alcohol, then they may go on to marijuana, or they may go on to other hard drugs. That was clearly the sequence. We would see that all the time. Because of all we've learned about cigarettes and the education, 20, 30 years ago, we weren't sure cigarettes were addictive, right? The tobacco industry said, no, it's not addictive, you can't get hooked on, there's nothing dangerous about it. But we've learned that cigarettes are very, very dangerous, and so we've had a lot of education, and the number of junior high and high school students smoking is becoming less and less and less. Well, what's to replace that is the number of seniors, maybe a third to a fifth of seniors, or a third or 50% of seniors, they start smoking marijuana before they get to cigarettes. And so things have been flipped. And what you see is people who even casual marijuana smokers are approximately 4 or 5 times, actually 7 to 8 times at greater risk of then becoming cigarette smokers, and 4 times higher to become physically dependent on nicotine when they're adults. So again, that's the sequence that we see. The other thing we see, when I'm dealing with people on marijuana, people with cocaine or opiates being things like Oxy, Percocet, Vicodin, heroin, and you talk to them and their histories, the vast majority of those people started using pot first. Now, whether that's a psychosocial factor Whether that's actually a cause and effect, we're not sure. But one area that's of particular interest in research is, marijuana, we've heard THC is the active component of marijuana. It's called a cannabinoid. So you have receptors in your brain that which marijuana, THC, connects to those cannabinoid receptors. You also have your brain receptors related to opiates. If you do oxy, Vicodin, heroin, connects to also opiate type receptors. And there's a connection in the brain between the opiate receptor system and the cannabinoid system. And in models, what we've seen, and this needs further investigation, but if you look at particularly animal models, if you expose adolescent animals to marijuana, it really pharmacologically affects the opiate system, the more prone to opiate addiction. And I know that this is not a topic for us today, but as I imagine most of you know, opiates are those are the up and coming, the last wave for the last 5-10 years of drugs on campuses, which are killing people, right? Pain pills, heroin is a lot cheaper than pain pills. They go on to pain pills. I'm sure many of you know people who have been opiate addicts or have died from opiate addiction. And there is some concern that marijuana use does maybe pharmacologically, rather than just psychosocially, increase the likelihood of things like opiate addiction. And again, just practically, when you're treating opiate addicts, cocaine addicts, and just about everybody started from marijuana at some point. So again, whether it's cause and effect, whether it's pharmacological, or whether it's more psychosocial, we're not quite sure. That linkage is clearly there at this point. So, like we said from the beginning, we all come from a number of different backgrounds and experiences. I'm a physician. I've been treating this for the last 28, 29 years. But also, I've had addiction issues in my family. I've been in Al-Anon not as a physician, but as a member of Al-Anon at times. Now, my wife and I went back to Chicago 3 years ago. We had a wonderful, lovely niece, and she fought addictions throughout her life. She was in her 40s, had 2 young children. She ended up dying from addiction. Right? So we all have our personal experiences from this, but what's important for each of us in here is really to understand the facts as much as we have them. And particularly from the medical standpoint, it's very clear that at this particular stage in life, from 13 to 17, as the brain is really developing, it's really a critical period of time. And you can have effects on the brain as an adolescent that even when you stop later on could have direct impact on you later on. It's just like cigarettes. You may have stopped smoking when you were in your 20s or 30s, but you were smoking when you were younger, you still end up with lung cancer. Right? So you still have people dying of passive smoke because their family members smoked. So again, the effects and what you do now can have huge impact on later on. And as we talked about, the quality and the potency of this drug is much greater. It's 10 times greater, the straight marijuana that you get. The hash oils, actually there's some hash oils in the market there that are 90% THC. And then the thing you have to be concerned about is the synthetic type of marijuana out there that they describe as synthetic marijuana. Things like ice, K2, bath salts. But if you do the chemical analysis on them, it's not just synthetic marijuana THC in there. They often are spiked with amphetamines, hallucinogens. You see people become very psychotic taking those synthetic type drugs. THC is the most prevalent component, the biggest cannabinoid, as well as CBD, which is another cannabinoid in marijuana. But there are 113 different cannabinoids in marijuana. So talking about regulating it, how we're going to do that, it takes 7 to 8 to 9 years to get a drug to market when a pharmaceutical company wants to do it, because all the tests you have to do for safety and seeing how it works. Now, I don't know how in the world they're going to regulate marijuana in terms of its different potencies and quantities, because there's so much variability. Ratios of CBD versus THC, how with other cannabinoids in it. So it's a very, very complex subject, obviously, scientifically as well as just personally. So again, bottom line, what you feel about it, at least what we know scientifically, the earlier you use it, the higher potency, the higher frequency, clearly has increased risk factors for all these different things that we talked about. Okay, thank you.
Did you take your brain? All right, well, my name's Chris Jackson, one of the pastors here at Grace Church. I have a piece of the night. I'm supposed to talk about what, if anything, does the Bible say about this subject, but I think I'm going to push mine to the very end tonight, and we'll just see if we have time to get into that a little bit. I really feel like having Dr. Suzuki here is huge, and the other panelists as well, but to have this level of expertise is really great, and I think what we should do is take about a 5-minute break. We have water, we've got some candy and some stuff in the back. We're gonna let you take about a 5, 6, 7-minute break, and then let's move into a Q&A time, because just in spite of everything that we just heard already tonight, we still legalized it. So there's still an argument that, hey, that it is okay in some settings, and okay, maybe I didn't smoke it when I was up to 18, but maybe I'm in my 30s now, and is it okay for me to smoke it? And is that gonna be a problem? And there's just maybe some more questions, and we really want to make sure that practically we answer questions. The goal of this conversation was not a moralistic, let us tell you why we hate weed. That was not the vision of the night tonight. So really, we want everybody to leave feeling like practically the questions were answered, and I'm understanding a little bit more. And then if we have time, we'll get into a little bit more of maybe how do we process through a scriptural lens. But 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll start taking questions and carry on.
All right. Can we hear it for our panelists? This is a really difficult task that I gave them. I said, hey, you have a little bit of time to talk about everything, and I'm not going to tell you what the other people are talking about because I don't know. And so I thought you guys did awesome. You came to that task, you did it well, and not knowing what the people before or after you're going to say. So I'm excited for this part. We had a lot of questions come in. I'm going to do my best to address as many of them. I'm going to try and group some of them together as we can. We won't get through all of them, it's just because of time. But, and you can keep texting them in, I'll keep checking. Hopefully I won't get too distracted on that. But, wow. So, can we just clarify real quick, what's the legal age for using marijuana?
For recreational use, because under the new legislation, it is 21 and over. It is illegal no matter what for under that age as a juvenile. Is it 21? Yeah, 21. So other than that, it is illegal for those age groups.
Okay. All right. In light of the legalization, is it more dangerous than alcohol, or how does it compare to alcohol?
Yeah, so clearly more people die every year of alcohol-related illnesses. So from a physical standpoint, it's not as dangerous as alcohol, I believe. But it's very similar. Like I think, with alcohol, we would all agree that some people drink too much. Some people are alcoholics. Should we ban alcohol like we did 100 years ago? I mean, that becomes a legal, moral issue. But again, but just like alcohol, we would all agree, I think, you don't want somebody who's pregnant drinking because that'll cause fetal alcohol syndrome with a child. It's the same concept with marijuana. At certain age groups, like during that 13 to 16, 17, it probably is more dangerous than alcohol in that particular age group because of the brain process.
Alan, I had an interesting question. It says, can you smoke marijuana in a designated smoking area?
The way that we're looking at the legislation today and conversations we've had with our district attorney's office, especially in the area where I am, designated smoking area, it's still out in public. No.
Okay. So let me follow up with that. Is there a such thing, I'll direct this to you, Kat, is there a such thing as responsible use of recreational marijuana?
Well, the thing that I typically ask my client with regards to anything, any diagnosis is, how is this serving you? And how is this hindering you and the goals you want to accomplish and the relationships you're in? And once someone says that something is distressing, it's causing them problems in relationships, it's causing them job function difficulties, school, they're no longer going, then I say, so is it a problem for you? And usually they say yes. And so that's, and if you look in the DSM, any diagnosis, it'll say it has to be distressing, causing them harm to be considered a diagnosis. If they're living fine with it, I guess they don't meet it, because that's the main criteria. And so responsible use, I would pose out those same questions. Is this a problem for you? How is this serving you? For some people, there is some short-term benefits, such as coping. How is it serving you in the long run? We always ask those questions to the person and kind of leave it up to them whether they're making a responsible or irresponsible decision.
Anything anyone wants to add to that?
Yeah, I pretty much mirror what Cal was saying in terms of, yeah, in an adult developed brain, it's probably no more dangerous than, say, what alcohol does. But it comes down to there's certainly individuals, if you have a specific psychiatric diagnosis, anxiety disorder, depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, you really should not be smoking because that will exacerbate those types of illnesses. And like Kat was saying, if your use of, be it alcohol or marijuana, is causing physiological addiction or psychological addiction, then by all means, it's not a good thing to be doing.
Okay. Then Dan, what are the effects of secondhand smoke, marijuana smoke?
You know, it's very interesting. For people who are smokers, they certainly typically smoke more than marijuana. And given the concentration of THC, the amount of people smoking is relatively low. So studies looking at, say, lung cancer from marijuana are very inconclusive. Smoke in general is damaging to the lung, may have acute effects on the lung, may have effects in terms of vasoconstriction of blood vessels. But in terms of true data that it's that dangerous, in terms of smoke itself, yeah, the data is pretty light on that right now.
Kat, what do you think some of the most common things that draw in youth or adolescents, teens? What are the most attractive attributes of it, in your opinion?
For one, the popularity lately, the fact that it has become something that their friends are doing, or they're out and they feel that maybe they get invited. And I have had a lot of clients say, I've been invited and chose not to, but I've also had people say, well, they offered and it's people that I trust and I see them be successful, and so I assume it doesn't, it's not affecting them, it's not going to affect me. So a lot of peer interaction being spaced now around using drugs, using alcohol. I think that's definitely a big draw, especially I work just with a lot of adolescents and young adults, and loneliness has run rampant, and it is a way to connect for a brief time with other people. Whether or not you consider that a true deep connection, that's left to that party, but it's a way to interact together over a mutual engagement of something. And so I think that's a lot of the appeal.
Then following up to that, like for the adolescents that do, whether they use it or they're selling it, how aware do you think their parents are?
With those that I have met personally that are using, I would say a very small percentage of their parents are aware of it. And it's difficult, there's different rules regarding confidentiality with minors and such, and it's really difficult when someone's maybe not a minor but still living with their parents, dependent on their parents, and it's something they don't know, and it is difficult. It affects relationships, and then the parents don't understand why their relationship is torn with their kids, and it's tough. It's tough because I think that they're completely unaware majority of the time, and that's pretty scary.
Is that your experience?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think most kids start smoking, the parents are totally unaware. And that's where it's so important to have these conversations, because unless you initiate those conversations with your junior high students, high school students, they likely aren't going to bring it up themselves. And there's a tremendous amount of shame about it, right? So I'm smoking, I'm doing bad things, they want to feel bad talking to their parents. Well, I feel bad, maybe I should just keep smoking more because I'm a bad person. And the conversation really has to revolve around, you're not a bad person. There's a lot of good people, there's a lot of good, solid people who are smoking and have problems with it. It doesn't make you a bad person. So the more parents, family can talk about it openly, it gives them permission to talk about it and realize that they're not trapped in it. So I think the more silent you are about it, then you go into being with the wrong people, and that's what gets you into, I think, the opiates and the cocaine, the stimulants, the other drugs.
And I would just say that, would you agree that parents typically find out when the adolescents or young adults' performance starts decreasing? Like I'll say, parents will usually notice if their kid stops attending school, for instance, or their grades significantly drop, or now all of a sudden they've developed depression. Things like that is typically when I find parents kind of saying, like, is something going on here?
Absolutely. Then you have all that collateral damage you have to deal with at the same time.
From a law perspective, is that?
From what we're seeing, and whenever we come across issues like that, when I'm working, I'm getting reports from my school resource officer, who deals a lot with, obviously, the high schools. A lot of times when we do come across, and the school ends up coming across a student with marijuana and the parents are contacted, I totally agree with my fellow panel members here. We're seeing a lot that the parents did not know. But it is going to be interesting to see, just put out there, on how the future is what it's going to show, I did read a part of a statistic from the school resource officers in Denver that they showed a 36% of the students who had marijuana on them at the high school level got it from their parents or older brothers. So, and their legislation has been in effect a lot longer than ours. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens here in California.
Like they were given it from their parents, or
Yeah.
maybe they stole it, or?
Yeah, they gave it.
Okay.
Parents gave it to them.
Personal question for Kat. How could we get parents and students to have a conversation about this? And what do you recommend to parents? What do you recommend to students as they go back?
I would just say that your parents are really looking out for you. And that's another thing as a parent, to go to your kids reiterating that you are the person that cares about them more on this earth than anyone else. And so when you have conversations that are difficult with them, it's so that they don't feel scared to approach you, that you're approaching them so that you're taking that off their shoulders. You're removing the burden from them as the adult and modeling that it's acceptable to have these difficult conversations and how to have these difficult conversations, because they don't know how to do that. And so it's a great way to model maturity as the parent, stepping up and having that conversation. Just like with anything, any other hot topic, sex, everything else, they're gonna find out information somewhere. So where would you like them to get that information? And those of you sitting in this room now have a good baseline of some solid information that's fact-based that you can present. And there's some great conversation questions on the table, I believe, that can start that conversation. Maybe if you're a dad and you have a young man, you guys go out, together, just the two of you on an outing or whatever. But I think that making them feel at ease, often maybe doing an activity while you have a difficult discussion, I find very comforting for young adults. But I think these conversations need to be had in the home, because they need to know that should they get curious and try, and then maybe something happen, they can talk to you because they know you're understanding, and no matter what, you love them. And so just like with any behavioral issue, it's not about lecturing, it's about reminding them that you love them, and this is an action they may or may not choose to take, and how you feel about it, and how might they feel about it.
Dan, what's the difference between smoking pot and vaping it?
Yeah, so, there's smoking, there's vaping, there's edibles, there's using oil, so it's all different, and it depends a lot on the concentration of these things. So again, whenever you're doing vaping or smoking, it's going into your lungs, and so, your blood goes directly from the lungs to the brain, goes through the blood-brain barrier, so you get an immediate hit from it. When you're eating, it takes longer to ingest. Again, it's a tough question, because there's so much difference in terms of potency of these drugs. And even if you're smoking it, using oils, if you're eating it, there's such a variation in concentrations. It's really hard to say. But the main thing is time course. But the vaping tends to be more high potency.
On the topic of smoking, is there anything about the law that forbids smoking marijuana in the presence of minors or those under 21?
Yes, that is part of the legislation. So you definitely cannot do it in the presence of a minor, whether it's your kid or anywhere else. One of the other things is, like I said earlier, no smoking within 1,000 feet of a school. So of course the question comes up, what about somebody who lives right next door to a school? The law states, this new legislation states, as long as it cannot be seen by the students, nor any type of odor, and you're inside your residence.
So if you have a minor at your residence, can you grow it?
That's a good point too. From what we're seeing there, and again, this is all very new, and a lot of this is getting hashed out as questions like these come up with our district attorney, and as we see future cases get filed, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of legal going back and forth. So from what we're interpreting from what I'm reading, is that as far, growing is one thing, definitely not using or consumption is another.
I had a question I want to direct at Dan. It just came in. So this person has someone that's close to them that has some pretty strong, or they used the word they're heavily prescribed drugs for treating migraines, and it was suggested that they try marijuana. What do you think about that?
Yeah, at this point, there's really no good research showing that. So different types of body pains have different etiologists, different physiologists behind it. And as far as I'm aware, there's no evidence of marijuana use for migraines at this point. So the best thing is to talk to pain specialists, neurology, and see what they recommend. There's a variety of pharmacological, non-pharmacological things. So again, it's not approved for, and as far as I'm aware, there's no evidence of that.
So we've had some questions about CBD, which is hemp oil.
No.
How would you?
CBD, so the cannabis, the plant, has, again, about 113 different cannabinoids. Those are specific chemicals that relate to cannabinoid receptors in the brain. There's a CB1 receptor, CB2 receptor, there's probably more receptors. And the CBD is actually an antagonist to THC, so it helps them self-modulate it. So there's a lot of people who use indigo versus sativa because one's more excitatory, one's more sort of calming. So that's why people who use it understands the different concentrations, strengths, and lingos. But again, the problem is, since this isn't regulated, what you say you're getting really may not be what you're getting. And there's not a lot of data on those other cannabinoids in the drug itself. But people take more, certain types of the cannabinoids to sort of pick themselves up, to get more excited. Those are more to slow themselves and calm them down. CBD is thought to be more sort of calming, and THC is thought to be more excitatory.
So what are the effects of using like a cream or an oil with the CBD versus like the high THC content of smoking? Or
Yes, again, the theory and thought is more CBT, the less excitatory type high effect you get from it, and the more calming effect from you get.
Okay.
But again, it's pretty variable, and despite what people say, it's hard to really understand those ratios and really get what you're asking for at times.
When, in your experience, what is medicinal marijuana prescribed for?
Yeah, so again, it's FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, approves it specifically for chemotherapy, nausea, and vomiting. If you can't tolerate, other medications aren't working. And for people specifically with HIV who are having cachectic, they're very emaciated, they need appetite stimulation. And those are the only two indications. Again, there are ones we think have indication in terms of multiple sclerosis. There's some research being done specifically in terms of for anti-seizure effects, particularly in pediatric age groups, but those don't have those specific indications yet. But, and I'm sure Alan can comment, it's amazing you see people coming from these marijuana clinics, and they're prescribed marijuana for every single thing under the sun that has no medical legitimacy and equally probably are harmful. So at our hospital, what we said is, if you're being prescribed one of these, say Marinol or something, or from one of these clinics, we want a letter from that doctor saying that it's okay for you to take, taking on the liability risks with it. And nobody gives us letters because they know that it's high liability. So can I make a comment? So, part of the problem is that this is all about education, and there's a multi-billion-dollar industry out there developing, and people are being fed information and misinformation because people want to make money off of it. And that's where, just like cigarettes 20, 30 years ago, I think particularly adults, youth need to be aware of that marketing and being told that it's good for one thing when there's really no install and actually could be harmful.
So Kat, I had a question come in, and I want to hear your response to it. So a parent said, if you're having this conversation about marijuana with your child, and they ask you if you've smoked pot, and in parentheses, and you did, should you be honest?
I always err on honesty, because your kids want to know you, and if they're asking you a personal question, there's a reason they're asking you. They may think, oh, well, then they just don't get it. Like if you say no and maybe you did or whatever, but for instance, my relationships with people get a little bit one-sided, if we're being honest. Like they come and talk to me and they feel like they get to know me, but really how much do they get to know me? And every once in a while I get a personal question, and the clinician in me wants to, why are you asking that question? I try to turn it back to them. But if it's harmless, I answer, because it's serving them a purpose. So if they're asking you a question, you feel like it's personal or whatever, maybe you don't want to share because you don't want to, oh, I was a kid. For one, you can educate them on the fact that the drug is very different. We've all said that. I think every single one of us mentioned how different it is now, and that would be something to educate them on. But also to say, yeah, whatever the situation was, yeah, I tried recreationally one time. I know what the pressure can be like. Maybe it was harmful or whatever. Sharing your experience with your kids makes you just more of a safe place, and they know you're being honest and they can be honest. So, yeah.
Alan, I've had a couple of questions come up, and Dan, you can speak into it as well, but the questions are is there a way that's been developed, are they developing a way to detect marijuana in your system, like a breathalyzer or blood test, like a quick way of doing it?
Well, for example, DUIs, driving under the influence. We've always seen throughout the history that I've been working, and if somebody's showing objective signs of being under the influence of marijuana, especially if they cop out to it, during a DUI investigation, we'll always, part of the investigation is to request blood sample. If the subject, gives a blood sample, at least here in LA County, it's sent to the crime lab and they'll do a test running to see if there are THC levels, and that comprised with the totality of the investigation, statements made, objective symptoms of what the officer sees, the physical symptoms, pupil reaction and so forth, then we'd be able to work it that way. Now, because of, this growing topic, there are companies that are working right now as we speak to do research on being able to detect. As of today, we don't have a breathalyzer. It's like, oh, you smoked weed. We don't have that yet. Will we in the future? Quite possible, but there are companies doing that research now.
And correct me, I don't think there's a specific, they don't qualitatively test for the amount of THC in the system, and legally,
That's correct.
there's not a level, which is different than alcohol.
Yeah.
So, and because THC is lipophilic, it stays in your fat, and so it may stay there for weeks at a time. And so when you urine test, a person may not have used for 2 or 3 weeks, but may test out positive. That's where it gets a little bit complicated.
Since I have nothing to contribute, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So what are the consequences of being underage and being caught with it? And what would the consequence be of a DUI if it was marijuana related?
Well, as far as DUIs go, whether it's, DUI drugs, how, it'll be referred to, or DUI alcohol, there's all different types of consequences for anybody who knows anybody that might have gotten a DUI. They all pretty much remain the same. Suspension of driver's license, the possibility, well, at least with alcohol, possibility of, a breathalyzer put on their vehicle to start it. You're talking fines, obviously monetary fines being imposed, probation, things of that nature. Now, under this new legislation, from what we will be seeing is for example, like a juvenile who's been caught smoking marijuana, obviously outside the regulations of Prop 67 on adult use of marijuana. So we're looking at, fines that's going to have to be paid by the parent, I guess you could say, fines that will be have to be paid by a parent, as well as community service, whether it's 5 hours, 4 hours, things of that nature. And those are the guidelines. What happens in the courts, in front of the judge or a jury if they fight it in trial, it'll be wait to be seen. So we're talking fines, community service.
Great question that came in that I'm really curious about is, if it's illegal to smoke in the presence of a minor, and say you get caught with that, is that a child endangerment offense? Is there first, second, third? Or do we know what happens yet?
Well, as far as first, second, and third, that's all going to be, and penalties behind that, that's going to be determined by the courts.
Okay.
Through the legislative process. Child endangerment, that particular crime in and of itself is a felony, and you need to show the elements of the crime, that specific crime, as per the California Penal Code, to show what kind of, do we have those elements to create, can we verbalize what is the danger to the child at that point. Secondhand smoke, I have yet to see that case come through, at least through my jurisdiction yet, so it's be real interesting to say. I think it's safe to say we're going to look at fines and community service and probation again. But I have seen in the past where we found a marijuana grow inside of a residence, even prior to, to this proposition, seen a marijuana grow inside the residence, and it had, like I said earlier, we're talking the amount of electricity and the water that's pumping through to irrigate and to provide UV light for these plants. they were done in a very haphazardly type of way where it was very dangerous. You had things that weren't up to code violations, that code enforcement of any particular jurisdiction, in my case, our jurisdiction, we brought them in and said, that's dangerous, you've got exposed wires here, you have a fire hazard here, you've got a baby in a crib right next door to that. That looks like, to us, child endangerment because that kid is in danger. And we got a good criminal filing on that.
Very cool. I have one more question I want to direct at you two, and we got a couple questions coming in for you, and I think that'd be a good segue in for you to sharing any part that you want to share as well. The question is, how can a family support a user in a positive way that will point them in the right direction?
That's a great question.
Very vague.
Well, I think it comes down to conversation. And again, when you see people abusing substances, a lot of it's very shame-based. Oftentimes, nobody feels worse than they do. And again, you want to approach in a way that's empathetic, sympathetic. You know, it seems to us that you're having difficulties, and it seems related to, you know, you seem to be smoking a lot. And, you know, maybe we'd like to talk about it, but if you don't feel comfortable talking to us, you know, let's get you to a counselor that you can talk to and discuss it with them. And, you know, there are, you can't, it's like, you know, you can lead the horse to water, you can't force them to drink, but there's a lot of resources out there. You know, there's Marijuana's Anonymous, there's 12-step groups, there's Al-Anon for family members, if you have a loved one who's in addiction, to figure out with other people how you deal with your own issues with it, how to help them. National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. So there's a lot of resources that are available to help families that have loved ones that they're involved with doing the drugs. But again, I'd emphasize, when people start using drugs, often, although they may be very angry and hostile and upset at you, nobody usually feels worse about it than they do. And you've got to connect with that part of them that feels bad, guilty, shameful. Because again, it's not bad people doing drugs. People may be genetically predisposed, and they're physiologically connected to it now and they can't get out of it. They lie, they say things they went to. That's part of their illness, the way I would look at it. You really got to align with that pain and hurt that they're going through.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's an opportunity to kind of put your therapist and counselor hat on a little bit as a parent. And for one, I love this question because it just shows like whoever wrote that's a great parent already because you're concerned about how to help your kid and that's awesome. And so you're on the right track already. Your heart's in the right place. And so coming from that place of genuineness and openness and willingness to listen, and empathy is the perfect word. Like we don't know. We could live in the same house as our kids and have no idea what they're dealing with. And I say it all the time because I think youth can be really misunderstood or minimized. But for us as adults, we have our work life, and then we have our personal life, and then we have, you know, our social life. Like we have all different areas, and we can kind of like leave work at work for the most part or whatever, or vent about it. But for kids, like school and their social life is their whole world. So if that is messed up, it's like we can't possibly fathom, you know, how messed up life is for them. And so coming in a place of understanding or trying to understand and letting them know, like, I want to understand you. A lot of people, it's a coping mechanism. So why did they use in the first place? Like, that's what I would want to know. Like, what led you to it? And maybe there's something, maybe they're just grasping for something, and that's the thing they could get a hold of, and they really just need different coping skills, and they would be happy to replace it if they had something else. They just don't. They don't have that tool at their disposal, and they do have this at their disposal. So, yeah, opening that conversation, I think, would be important, and coming from a place of really just trying to understand in a loving manner.
So there's a lot of questions that we're not going to get to, and I do apologize for that. We have a couple for Chris that I want to get to, but if you have, there's a lot of personal questions that relate to an individual. If you can catch them afterwards, I'm sure they'd love to. But really quick, where can people go to find answers other than just Google?
Google.
To find answers?
Yeah, about any questions they might have about marijuana.
Well, that's a good question.
Think about that. We'll come
Don't
back.
go to Google.
So, again, there's more misinformation than true live information.
Is there any credible sites that you can recommend, or websites or organizations?
Yeah, the government has, there's the national, again, for family members, National Alliance of Mentally Ill. Government has websites on SAMHSA, there's different websites that talk about some of the facts about marijuana, but you only go to the government websites that are helpful, not too much of YouTube or some of these other places.
The DEA has a website.
They do.
Yeah, and they have a whole, there's a DEA like museum website that has a whole section on marijuana.
As far as California law, I mean, obviously Google on California laws, as well as far as from the legal standpoint and enforcement standpoint. I mean, you could easily just contact any of your local law enforcement in wherever you live, and you'll be able to get some guidance in that matter.
As far as like medical and psychological and that sort of thing, obviously we are under confidentiality standards, so if you're going to see your medical doctor anyway and you have questions, even if it's not relevant to you, like that's what they're there for, to answer those questions. And same, like if you're a client or whatever and you have a counselor or someone in mental health that you see, a psychiatrist, whatever, there's confidentiality there too, so you can ask your questions on behalf of other people or whatever to a professional directly.
All right, so I have two questions. I'd like to read them both to you and then let you present on that. First question is, morally, is it okay to invest in a business venture involving the marijuana industry? Then the second question is, are there any biblical mandates or principles against the use of marijuana? You wanted questions.
Those are good ones.
That's great. Okay, let me do this. Thank you all so much. I'll let you hop off the stage. Can we thank the panelists? So I know you've been sitting a long time, and I'll be brief. I'm not going to preach a sermon at you. I'm not going to go on too long. I'll maybe talk for 8-9 minutes and just make a few comments on this. And I think in sharing some of these principles, you'll be able to overlay some of these principles over those questions. And is that better, Abby? Okay, thank you. The Bible does not have a verse that says, "Thou shalt not smoke weed. Thou shalt not inhale." You can't smoke it until you're a certain age. The Bible just doesn't say that. We have to extract some principles that we lay on top of these issues. And even though we've been here for a while, I do think this is important to add this particular piece. I think most everybody's questions tonight, they deal with the details and they deal with the medical, and that's where we need education. But I do want to just give us a biblical grid that we can run this through. People ask pastors questions all the time, not at the same level that they would ask a doctor. I think it would be tough to be a doctor. You couldn't go anywhere without somebody wanting to come up and tell you about their ailments. I mean, you probably can't go to dinner without somebody coming up and being like, "Oh, hey doc, I've got this clicking in my shoulder. Would you come have a listen and tell me what you think that is?" Or have you ever run into your doctor in the grocery store and oh, perfect timing, I needed to see you. I've got this mole that I'm worried about. And people do that with pastors. I mean, they don't show us their moles, but they talk to us about their problems. "Pastor, I've got this problem. I've got this issue. I've got this dilemma. I've got this husband. I've got a question about the book of Revelation." I was on the soccer field and somebody on the sideline asked me a question about the book of Revelation. But usually when people have questions of pastors about the Bible, they're questions like, what does the Bible say about this or that? What does the Bible say about global warming? Or alcohol, or R-rated movies? And when somebody asks what does the Bible say about this question, what they're usually asking is the Bible okay with this? Am I going to get in trouble with God or the Bible if I go down this particular path? And that's what people usually ask. Now, there are some principles from the Bible that we can lay on top of this, but just in about 3 minutes here, I just want to make sure we're all reading the Bible the same way. Because there's different ways that people read the Bible, and the way you read the Bible can help determine how you conclude on some of these issues. If you're not a Christian, you might not read the Bible at all. Or maybe you read it once in a while because it's interesting ancient literature, or maybe you look at it occasionally because there's wisdom in it. But if you're a Christian, it seems like there's usually maybe one of 4 ways that people read the Bible. The first way people read the Bible is like it's an instruction manual. And that's not the worst way in the world to read the Bible. I mean, we need instruction, especially when we're trying to assemble something as complicated as a life. But how many of you know instruction manuals are boring? I hate reading an instruction manual. If I'm assembling something, show me the picture and let me get started. And granted, I might not have all the parts, when there'll be a few extra parts that I came up with, and it might not be quite as level, but I've never heard anybody go, ooh, I can't wait for tonight. I've got this new instruction manual downloaded onto my iPad. And so it's okay to read the Bible that way, but it's maybe not the best way. Another way people read the Bible is like it's a map. And again, not a terrible way to read the Bible. I mean, we need direction. I don't navigate by the stars. I need a map app to tell me when to turn left. But by the way, do you all know what maps actually are? They were actual things. They were beautiful pieces of paper. They came really folded up. And if you unfolded it, you could never refold it, right? But they told you how to get from point A to point B. Now again, it's good to figure out how to get from point A to point B, but I don't wake up in the morning desperate to read the atlas. So it's not always the best way to read the Bible as a map. And there's a third category where sometimes people, it's a little more pessimistic. They don't read it like an instruction manual. They don't read it like a map. They read it like the prohibition signs at the beach. Have you ever seen those signs at the beach that tell you all the things you can't do? Okay, welcome to the beach. No glass, no skateboards, no picking up the seashells, no poking the sea anemones, no having any fun. And sometimes people read the Bible that way. And the Bible for people is a list of do's and don'ts, restrictions, prescriptions. And that is not an exciting way to read the Bible, and it's not a romantic way to read the Bible. I think there's a fourth way, and I think this is the way we should read the Bible. We could read the Bible like a love letter. I had a Bible college professor, in fact, same lady who told me, read the red and pray for the power. And she said, read the book like he wrote it to you, because he did. And when we read the Bible that way, we very quickly realize that there is an urgency in the Bible. It's written with the tenderness and the passion and the concern of a parent who's desperate for their child. It's like a parent's writing a child who's about to graduate and launch into the larger world, like Amber's about to do in about 5 weeks, and like Abby and you other seniors are about to do. And so when we read the Bible as a love letter from a parent who's desperate for their child, we very quickly find 4 principles that we can lay on top of our questions. And so those 2 questions that came at me, you can lay these principles on top of them. And I know sometimes it's easier to just give me a yes or no. Don't give me the spiel, don't give me the speech. Can I or can't I? But that's not often how it works. We're given principles to apply. So let me just rapid fire throw these at you, and this won't be long. But number 1, when we read the Bible with that perspective, we very quickly realize that the Bible wants you to live. In Deuteronomy 30, verse 19, it says, this day I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you, that I've set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Now choose life, so that you and your loved ones may live. If you had to shrink the entire message of the Bible into one word, it would be the word live. Live. Make every decision in your life from the perspective that God wants you to live the fullest, healthiest, safest, most invigorating life possible. That's number 1. Number 2, the Bible wants you to stay in control. And this is an important one when we talk about alcohol or when we talk about substances. In 1 Corinthians 6:12, it says, I have the right to do anything. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. I mean, we're talking about legalities, we're talking about medical issues, we're talking about that stuff, but not everything's beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything. It was mentioned earlier by Dr. Suzuki that this question of addiction is huge. Is it physically addictive or is it psychologically addictive? Do you know what psychological addiction is? Psychological addiction is enslavement of the mind. And God wants us free. The Bible doesn't specifically address weed, but the Bible does address issues regarding alcohol. So there's no verse on weed. So if you think about how the Bible treats alcohol, the Bible does not forbid alcohol. The Bible forbids becoming controlled by it, coming under the influence of it in a way where it starts to dominate our life. And so when that happens, that's what the scriptures are against and are warning us against. See, as a pastor, I'm kind of a professional talker. I'm always talking at people and I'm always in meetings talking with people, and I have never heard a person say in all of my years of talking, I've never heard them say, the best decisions of my life happened when I was under the influence of an outside source. I shined in that moment when I was, who hooking up with that girl when I couldn't even hardly see straight. Best decision I ever. No, people they don't talk that way. When people look back on their life, they realize that the worst decisions of my life happened when I submitted to an outside force that was trying to dominate me. It's not a moralistic, this is bad, you shouldn't do that. It's God saying, live. And you're not going to be able to live unless you stay in control. So the second principle from Scripture is that God wants you to stay in control. Number 3, the Bible wants you to pay the right price for the right reward. Galatians 6:9 says, don't become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. This becomes the most difficult issue in talking with our children and young people in the different generations. It's this idea of the fact that pleasure always costs us. Whether it's a legitimate pleasure or an illegitimate pleasure, it always costs us. Illegitimate pleasures cost us on the back end. It's kind of like shopping with your credit card. Doesn't cost you anything up front, slap it down, get what you want, but if you're not careful, years later you could still be paying on that thing. Legitimate pleasures cost us on the front end. That we get charged either way, but a legitimate pleasure will charge you on the front end. Save yourself sexually for the person you're going to spend your life with. Be wise with your money now so you can retire with some money then. Embrace discipline today. In fact, Muhammad Ali said, embrace discipline today so you can live the rest of your life like a champion. So pleasure always costs us, either on the front end or the back end. And the Bible wants you to pay the right price for the right reward. And then number 4, the Bible wants you to do all of that with no regrets. So the Bible is a love letter written from a parent who's passionate for your future, a God who created you and then loved you enough to not just bring you here, but climb on a cross and die for you. God wants you to soar. The sky is the limit with your potential, and He wants you to absolutely rock and have an incredible life and fulfill every possible expression of your destiny. And He wants you to sleep every night of your life with the beauty and the strength of a clean conscience. So this is so much more than yes or no, or is it okay or is it not, and how much and when. You know what? That's secondary. If you're of age and you want to smoke weed, well, funnel it through this grid. God loves you. He wants you to live. He wants you to thrive and flourish. The issue isn't a moralistic can I, can't I. The issue is life. So there is no verse that says you can't smoke weed. What the Bible says is your body's the temple of the Holy Spirit. Honor God with your body. Don't do things with your body that make other people struggle and stumble. And then the Bible says to not become controlled by an outside source. So people always think you're going to talk about sin and stuff like that in church. Sin is a violation of God's standard and desire. The standard is the picture of Jesus Christ, the most fully alive human that's ever lived. And His desire is that you live. And His desire is that you stay in control. And His desire is that you pay the right price for the right reward. And His desire is that you do all of that with no regrets. So can you open a pot shop and tithe to Grace Church on the proceeds and that be morally okay? That's probably not something I can give a quick answer to. I think that we'd have to process that. Could you have a liquor store and run an equitable business? And that's a pretty dicey question, and I wasn't really a panelist anyway, so I don't think I'm even going to try and go there. But I think that's it. I think you're awesome. Thank you so much for being here. You can mob Suzuki, you can mob Kat and Alan and talk to them if you want when we're done. Thank you for being here. Please keep talking. Please keep engaged with all of this. Jeff, thank you for putting this together and setting everything up. You guys are dismissed.